The human warship Invictus, a supposedly powerless relic and monument to humanity's defeat, flickered to life, ancient systems engaging one by one as a human slave mopped its hull. Ryan Shaw, a grizzled human veteran subjugated to janitorial servitude in the Grand Andorian Historical Museum, gripped his mop tightly as he listened to the sneering taunts of the Andorian youths. They circled the Invictus like vultures, mocking its primitive design and reveling in the triumph of the Andorian Empire over the weak, inferior humans in the ancient war. The pompous noble, Linux, proclaimed the loudest, his voice dripping with disdain. "Behold the mighty human warship, a rusting bucket of bolts. This scrap heap is a testament to humanity's pitiful defeat. The Invictus, more like the impotent. It's nothing more than a powerless husk, a monument to Andorian supremacy." Ryan gritted his teeth, his knuckles white as he squeezed the mop handle. He wanted nothing more than to knock the smug grin off Linux's face, but he knew he couldn't afford to lose this job. Humans were barely tolerated in Andorian society, and janitorial work was one of the few positions available to them. As Ryan moved to mop the Invictus's hull, his hand brushed against the cold metal. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The ship began to subtly power up its dormant systems, recognizing the presence of its true master. A human. Ryan felt a faint vibration beneath his fingertips, a whisper of the Invictus reawakening. Little did the Andorians know that the Invictus was never truly deactivated. It had been waiting all these years, a sleeping giant ready to be roused by the touch of its rightful commanders. As the ship stirred to life, Ryan realized that he held the key to humanity's salvation, or its ultimate destruction. The fate of his species now rested in his hands, and failure was not an option. That night, after the last Andorian tourists shuffled out of the museum, Ryan found himself drawn back to the Invictus. His shift was over, but some inexplicable force pulled him toward the ancient warship. As he approached the hulking vessel, the ramp lowered with a hiss as if beckoning him inside. Ryan hesitated for a moment before stepping onto the ramp, his heart pounding in his chest. The interior of the Invictus was pristine, untouched by the ravages of time. The corridors gleamed with a soft, ambient light, and the air was crisp and clean. Ryan marveled at the advanced human technology surrounding him, a stark contrast to the primitive tools he was accustomed to using as a janitor. He made his way to the captain's quarters, guided by an instinct he couldn't explain. Inside, he noticed a small, hidden compartment beneath the captain's desk. With trembling hands, he opened the compartment, revealing a dusty, leather-bound log and a glittering crystal key. As Ryan began to read the log, his eyes widened in disbelief. The Invictus, it turned out, had not been defeated in battle. Instead, the crew had sacrificed themselves to activate a secret weapon hidden within the ship, designed to be unleashed when humanity faced its darkest hour. The crystal key, he realized, was the trigger. Suddenly, an ear-splitting alarm pierced the silence, echoing throughout the Andorian city. Ryan rushed to the bridge, where the view screen displayed a massive Klexon invasion fleet entering the system, their ships bristling with weapons. The Andorians, who had grown complacent in their dominance, were caught completely unprepared. In the city below, Linux, now a high-ranking military officer, frantically barked orders to mobilize the planetary defenses, but it was too late. The Klexon ships easily overwhelmed the Andorian fleet, their superior firepower tearing through the defenders like paper. Desperate, Linux's thoughts turned to the Invictus. He raced to the museum, hoping to use the ancient warship's weapons to turn the tide of battle. But when he tried to interface with the ship's systems, he was met with a flashing red message: "Access denied." The ship rejected him, its systems locking him out. On the bridge, Ryan watched as Linux pounded on the console in frustration. In that moment, he realized the truth. The Invictus would only respond to a human touch. The fate of Andoria, and perhaps the galaxy, now rested in his hands. Outside, Klexon dropships descended upon the city like a swarm of locusts, disgorging hordes of heavily armed soldiers. Ryan's gaze flicked between the chaos unfolding on the view screen and the gleaming crystal key in his hand. he was faced with an impossible choice: help his Andorian oppressors, who had subjugated his people for generations, or seize this chance for humanity's revenge. Ryan stood on the bridge of the Invictus, his hand hovering over the crystal key as the weight of his decision bore down upon him. Linux's desperate pleas echoed through the hull, each pound of his fist against the metal a reminder of the Andorians' desperate situation. Ryan's mind raced with memories of the indignities and suffering his people had endured under Andorian rule, the years of servitude and degradation that had left humanity a shadow of its former self. Yet, even as the bitter taste of resentment filled his mouth, Ryan couldn't help but think of the innocent Andorian civilians caught in the crossfire. The children playing in the streets, the families huddled in fear as the Klexon ships descended upon their city. They had played no part in humanity's subjugation. They were victims, just as much as his own people had been. Ryan's gaze fell upon a faded photograph, tucked away in a corner of the captain's quarters. In it, a group of humans and Andorians stood side by side, their uniforms bearing the insignia of the Invictus. They were smiling, their faces etched with the camaraderie and shared purpose that had once united their two races against a common enemy. The ship's log spoke of a time when humans and Andorians had fought together, their differences set aside in the face of a greater threat. In that moment, Ryan realized that the Invictus was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of the unity and sacrifice that had once bound their peoples together. With a deep breath, he made his decision. Ryan strode to the airlock and opened it. Linux stumbled inside, his eyes wide with shock as he took in the sight of a human standing at the helm of the mighty warship. How is this possible?" Linux stammered, his voice thick with disbelief. "The Invictus responds only to human hands," Ryan explained, his tone even. "I'm the only one who can operate it." Linux's shoulders slumped, his earlier bravado gone. In its place was a humility born of desperation. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My people. We need your help. We can't face the Klexon alone." Ryan met Linux's gaze, his eyes hard. "I'll help you," he said, "on one condition. When this is over, humanity must be granted equal status and rights within Andorian society. No more subjugation, no more servitude. We stand together, as equals." Linux hesitated for a moment, the weight of Ryan's words sinking in. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You have my word," he said, his voice firm with resolve. Ryan took his place in the captain's chair, his hands settling on the controls as if they had been made for him. Linux stood at his side, taking the tactical officer's station. The Invictus hummed with power, its engines roaring to life. With a lurch, the ship rose from its museum pedestal, its hull tearing through the roof and sending debris raining down upon the stunned Andorians below. The Invictus soared into the sky, its sleek form cutting through the clouds as it raced towards the Klexon invasion fleet. On the bridge, Ryan's fingers flew over the controls, the ship's weapons systems coming online with a hum of barely restrained power. The targeting systems locked onto the Klexon ships, their hulls glowing with an eerie red light as the Invictus's advanced sensors identified their weak points. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the viewscreen, the Klexon fleet looming before them like a swarm of angry hornets. Beside him, Linux's face was set in a grim mask of determination, his hands steady on the weapons controls. They were two unlikely allies, bound together by the desperate need to save their peoples from annihilation. The Invictus surged forward, its weapons blazing to life as it charged headlong into the heart of the Klexon fleet. The battle for Andoria had begun, and the fate of two races hung in the balance. The Invictus shuddered as a barrage of Klexon plasma fire slammed into its shields, the bridge lighting up with warning alerts. Ryan gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white as he wove the ship through the enemy fleet, dodging and weaving to avoid the worst of the onslaught. Beside him, Linux fired the ship's weapons with grim focus, his face illuminated by the glow of the targeting screens. But even as they fought with all their skill and determination, it quickly became clear that the Invictus was outmatched. The Klexon ships were too many, their weapons too powerful. The Invictus's shields flickered and strained under the relentless assault, the hull groaning with each impact. "We can't keep this up much longer," Linux said through gritted teeth, his hands flying over the weapons console. "Our shields are down to 20%. Ryan's mind raced, searching for a solution. And then he remembered the captain's log, the mysterious crystal key, and the secret weapon it promised. He turned to Linux, his eyes blazing with sudden hope. "Cover me," he said, leaping from his chair. "I have an idea." Linux nodded, his fingers tightening on the controls as he redoubled his efforts to keep the Klexon at bay. Ryan sprinted from the bridge, his heart pounding as he raced through the ship's corridors. He reached the central core, a vast chamber housing the Invictus's main power systems, and there in the center of it all stood an ominous device, its surface etched with strange symbols. "Prometheus Protocol," Ryan breathed, reading the label. With trembling hands he inserted the crystal key into the device's control panel and turned it. The device hummed to life, its surface glowing with an eerie light. A message flashed across the screen. "Prometheus Protocol activated. Singularity cannon charging. Warning. Use of this weapon will result in the destruction of the Invictus." Ryan's blood ran cold as he read the words. He had hoped the secret weapon would be their salvation, but now he realized the terrible price it would demand. To fire the cannon would be to sacrifice the Invictus, and likely his own life along with it. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the activation button. But then he thought of the Andorian civilians below, the innocent lives that hung in the balance. He thought of the years of oppression his people had endured, and the chance for a new beginning that Linux had promised. Footsteps echoed behind him, and Ryan turned to see Linux standing in the doorway, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. Understanding dawned on the Andorian's face as he read the message on the screen. Slowly, solemnly, he stepped forward and placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. No words were needed. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, to lay down their lives for the sake of their peoples. Together, they turned and made their way back to the bridge. Ryan's voice was steady as he opened a channel to the Andorian military command. "This is the Invictus," he said. "We have a plan to stop the Klexon, but it comes at a great cost. The Invictus will not survive." Stunned silence greeted his words, and then a voice crackled over the comm, thick with emotion. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. The Andorian people will forever remember the bravery of the humans who gave their lives to save us." Ryan nodded, his throat tight. He turned to Linux, meeting the Andorian's gaze. A moment of understanding passed between them, a recognition of the bond they had forged in the heat of battle. As the Singularity cannon reached full charge, Ryan guided the Invictus into the heart of the Klexon fleet, drawing their fire like a moth to a flame. The ship shuddered and groaned, its hull battered and scorched, but still it pressed on. Linux's hand hovered over the firing controls, his eyes locked on Ryan's. A final nod, a shared look of determination. Together they pressed the button. The cannon unleashed a massive burst of gravitational energy, a miniature black hole that tore through the fabric of space itself. Klexon ships were ripped apart like toys, their debris hurled into the swirling vortex. The Invictus shuddered and bucked, caught in the blast's periphery. Alarms screamed and sparks flew as the ship began to break apart, its hull fracturing under the immense strain. The Invictus shattered around Ryan and Linux, pieces of the once mighty warship drifting into the void. Flames licked at the crumbling hull as the ship's systems failed one by one. Alarms screeched their death knells, consoles exploding in showers of sparks and debris. Ryan clung to the captain's chair, his knuckles white as Linux braced himself against the tactical station. The artificial gravity sputtered and died, leaving them floating in the chaos. Through the shattered viewports, the remnants of the Klexon fleet hung in space, reduced to drifting wreckage by the Singularity cannon's devastating power. The Andorian homeworld loomed below, its cities and landscapes spared from the ravages of invasion. Escape pods jettisoned from the Invictus, carrying the surviving crew members to safety. But Ryan and Linux found themselves trapped on the bridge, the way to the escape pods blocked by twisted metal and sparking wires. Linux met Ryan's gaze, his eyes filled with a mix of resignation and pride. "We did it," he said, his voice barely audible over the din of the disintegrating ship. "Andoria is safe." Ryan nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth despite the dire situation. "And humanity." "We'll be free," Linux promised, clasping Ryan's shoulder. "Your sacrifice and the sacrifice of the Invictus will not be forgotten." A moment of camaraderie passed between them, a bond forged in the heat of battle and the shared knowledge of the price they had paid. But their respite was short-lived. Through the debris field, a Klexon battleship emerged, heavily damaged, but still operational. Its weapons glowed with an angry red light as it powered up for a final, vindictive strike against the Andorian capital. Ryan and Linux exchanged a knowing glance. They had one last duty to perform. Together they seized the controls, steering the collapsing Invictus on a collision course with the Klexon ship. The warship's thrusters fired, the last of their fuel expended in a desperate bid to close the distance. The Invictus plunged toward the Klexon battleship, the hull of the human warship crumpling and tearing away as it hurtled through space. Ryan and Linux held fast, their eyes locked on their target, unwavering in their determination. The two ships collided with a blinding flash, the Invictus's reactor going critical. A massive explosion consumed both vessels, a searing light that illuminated the Andorian sky like a second sun. On the surface, Andorian citizens watched in awe and sorrow as the fireball blossomed in the heavens, a testament to the sacrifice of the human and his ship. In the streets and squares, a hush fell over the crowds, a moment of silence for the saviors who had given everything to protect them. In the aftermath of the battle, the Andorian government moved swiftly to uphold Linux's promise. Humans were granted equal rights and status, their centuries of servitude and oppression officially coming to an end. But even as the proclamations were made and the laws were changed, tensions between the two races remained high. The scars of the past could not be erased overnight, and resentment still simmered beneath the surface. Andorians who had grown accustomed to their dominance over humanity struggled to accept this new reality, while humans, though now free, bore the weight of generations of subjugation. In the grand halls of the Andorian government, Linux's absence was keenly felt. He had become a symbol of change and unity, a bridge between the two races, and his loss left a void that seemed impossible to fill. The Andorians began the slow, difficult process of dismantling the societal barriers and prejudices that had defined their relationship with humans for so long, but progress was slow and halting. Memorials were raised to honor Ryan and the crew of the Invictus, their names etched in stone and metal, a reminder of the sacrifices that had been made. But even as the Andorians and humans took their first tentative steps toward reconciliation, the specter of the past loomed large. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and setbacks. In the end, the victory against the Klexon had come at a great cost, not only in lives lost, but in the realization that true peace and understanding would be a long and difficult journey. The scars of oppression and resentment ran deep, and healing them would take more than a single battle or a change in the law. As the Andorian and human leaders stood side by side at the dedication of the Invictus Memorial, their expressions were somber, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. The future stretched out before them, a path shrouded in mist, a reminder that even in the face of great sacrifice and heroism, the wounds of the past could not be easily erased. The story of the Invictus and her crew had come to an end, but the story of the Andorians and humans and their struggle to forge a new future together was only just beginning. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.